All right, it's 4 o'clock and we are privileged to have Trip Corbin from Davie Resource Group with us for this next session. He's going to be talking about ArcGIS Pro. Is it ready to be your primary GIS app? So please provide any comments or questions into chat, and we're going to have some time at the end that I will convey those to Trip. So Trip, welcome and take the stage, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here. Hope everybody's staying warm, dry, and not having too many problems with the ice. Do you remember, I guess it was 2 conferences, or maybe it's 3 conferences now ago, where the night before the conference was supposed to start, we got snow in Raleigh that was pretty deep. So, but we still had a great turnout. I was impressed. I thought for sure it would shut the conference down, but we soldiered on and had a great one. So glad to be here and part of the North Carolina GIS community, even though I'm down here in Atlanta. So if anybody doesn't know me, I have been in the GIS surveying mapping field for well over 25 years. Worked with a number of firms, Keck and Wood, obviously the Davie Resource Group, and just prior to this, EGIS Associates, which was my own GIS consulting company, and Davie acquired that back at the end of 2019. So I have written 3 books on ArcGIS Pro. I've been using it since it was in beta version, before it even came out to general use. So I've had what I really do consider the pleasure of working with Pro and kind of following its progression to where it is now. And so hopefully I'll be able to provide you with some good information and input about the product, where it sits, and is it ready to be your prime time daily driver GIS application, at least from the desktop level. So we'll talk about that as we go forward. So with that, I want to start off by giving you a little bit of history about the application, just so we're all up to speed on it. It's hard to believe that it first came out in 2015, and here we are in 2021. So it's been out about 5.5 or so years, and it's really progressed a lot since it was first released. It is a completely new product. So this isn't just some revamp of Arcmap and ArcCatalog. It is built on a whole different engine, has a whole different interface, as we'll see. I mean, it's just all new. Okay. So I bring that up because Arcmap has been around since, was it 1999? That's right. So Arcmap has been out for over 20 years, I guess closer to 22 years now. And we know it still has bugs, right? It still has issues. So is Arc Pro going to be absolutely perfect after only 5.5 years? Absolutely not. But I do find it to be generally a more stable platform than Arcmap, for me anyway. And I find it generally performs better. Again, my experience. The key to that, we'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute, but is you've got to have the hardware capable of running it. It does require a lot more computing power to run successfully than Arcmap and ArcCatalog did. So that's a big gotcha. And part of that is the .NET architecture that it's built on. It's no longer a 32-bit app, it's a 64-bit app. So that'll open up a whole new level of capability using modern hardware. Again, we'll talk about it in a minute. So just keep that in mind. When Arc Pro first was released in 2015, if you ask Esri, is Arc Pro going to replace Arcmap and ArcCatalog? They immediately said, no, it's not going to do that. Those of us that have been working with it knew that was an absolute fib, because they finally came out, I think it was probably about 2 years ago, and did finally admit that this is replacing the old Arc Desktop. So the Arcmap, ArcCatalog, and even ArcScene and ArcGlobe are going to be replaced eventually by Arc Pro completely. And if you go to Esri's website and start looking at the product list, you have to dig pretty deep to find references to Arcmap and ArcCatalog. It's all Arc Pro now. When are they going to get to the point that you don't get or can't get Arcmap and Arc Catalog, and they're not going to completely solve all that. I wish I could give you a definitive answer on that, but I don't even get one from Esri. Even, let's see, was it, I guess 2 years ago, I was at a ERISA GIS Pro conference where Jack Dangerman was there, and I was able to catch him, and I asked him, when is this replacement going to happen? And he really couldn't give me a straight answer either. So I've heard anywhere up to about 7 years. So we might still have a good bit of time, although 7 years is not that long, really. But I would suggest, if you haven't started looking at Pro, if you haven't started thinking about a migration plan, you probably ought to start doing it, because that's where Esri's putting all their desktop development time. It's all going into Pro. Matter of fact, 2.7.1 just came out this week, I think. I know I just got the notice to update this morning on my computer. So again, that's what they're doing, really focusing on this. And you'll see it because it seems, well, it doesn't see, it's like every quarter they have a new update for Pro to come out. So just keep that in mind. So to quickly compare these two, if you want a bigger, fuller comparison between Arcmap and ArcPro, I actually have on my YouTube channel, it's the EGIS Associates YouTube channel. I have a video that does this comparison. I think it's about 30 minutes long itself, but quickly, you know, ArcPro, because of its 64-bit architecture, is designed to use as much RAM as you throw at it. I will tell you right now, I recommend a minimum of 16 gigs of RAM. I'm running 32 on my desktop computer, and I'm running 16 on my laptop, and it seems to work pretty well. Arcmap can only use 4 gig, and that's because it's a 32-bit app. That's the most any 32-bit app can recognize. So, you know, you're limited on RAM, which means when you start running processes and all that, there's limits on how much it can run at any one time. And if anybody's worked with large data sets in Arcmap, you probably had to chop that up into pieces. I know when I work with data from Fulton County, which is where the city of Atlanta is located, I usually have to chop their data sets up into smaller pieces to be able to do any sort of analysis with it, just because it bogs down in Arcmap. In ArcPro, I can run with all 300,000 parcels or something without a problem. It runs with that. The other thing Pro brings as a 64-bit app using the .NET architecture is the ability to what we call hyperthread. And what that means is when you look at a modern computer, its CPU has multiple cores. You've heard quad core, dual core, all of that. So each one of those cores is really like a mini processor in the big processor. And when you hyperthread, you actually can say, okay, core 1 handle this part of the analysis, core 2 this part, and so on. So the more cores you have, the more effective or faster, whatever you want to use, that application can be. So ArcPro is able to do that, right? So if you have a multi-core processor, and like right now, if you look at all the new Ryzen, what was it? Ryzen 5000 series processors that just came out, if you can get one, you know, we're talking 16 cores or more on some of those, right? So being able to leverage those, if you've got them, is a big plus and really will speed things up a good bit. I found that some of my processes run as much as twice as fast in ArcPro as they did in Arcmap there. So get that. The other part with Pro is that because it does allow 3D visualization, so without having to have ArcGlobe or ArcScene in the core product, we can look at data in 3D. It has a lot higher graphics requirements. And as a result, Esri now supports dedicated graphics cards, GPUs, graphics processing units, and it really recommends having those. Again, if you're going to be working in Pro, if you don't have one and you're only working with 2D data, you can probably get by with what they call integrated graphics. That's where your CPU, the main processor, handles the graphics load. But if you're going to do anything in 3D, or you start working with LiDAR data or a lot of raster imagery, then you certainly want to have that dedicated graphics card in there. I just noticed I'm actually talking with my hands, even though we're in a virtual meeting. Okay. So the interface in Arc Pro is completely different. That toolbar interface we're so used to in Arcmap, where we've got 16 different toolbars open and set up on a second monitor, is gone in Pro. Pro is switched to that ribbon interface, that same kind of style interface we see in Word and Excel and Photoshop and even AutoCAD and those kind of things. So we switch to that. And again, I'll demo that. What I have found as not only a user, but also a teacher, instructor in the use of these applications, is that brand new users, somebody that's never touched GIS, is much quicker to pick up Arc Pro in that ribbon interface. It's much more intuitive than the old toolbar. Now, if you're an old Arcmap user, you're accustomed to the toolbar stuff, you know where your things are, yeah, you're going to hate the ribbon just because everything's moved. But new users really seem to pick up Pro a lot faster. Already mentioned 3D visualization. They both still have all the same extensions. So 3D analyst, spatial analyst, geostatistical, and so on. So those are there. And then lastly, Python. Arc Pro uses a whole different version of Python than Arcmap. So if you have Python scripts and tools that you've written, you may have to rewrite them or adjust them to run in Pro. Not every script that I've had to use, and I'm not a programmer, so I don't usually write these. I get other people and then I tweak them. But I would say at least 50% of my Python scripts I've had to get somebody to rewrite to run in Arc Pro because of the version difference in the one's 32-bit, one's 64-bit. So if you do have those customizations, you're going to have to port those over. The other thing is, as far as I know, and I'm not going to say it may have changed, but if you have any Python add-ins, so those are basically Python extensions where it has full GUIs and all that, Arc Pro doesn't support Python add-ins. So you do the Python scripts, which you'd have to build the interfaces in .NET. Okay, so you'd have to set that up. So that's something else as you're looking at migrating, you need to take into account. Okay, sorry, let me take a sip of water there. So let's jump into Pro just in case you haven't seen it. And I want to talk about a couple of new things that have come out very recently that also may help remove some of your reluctance to go into Pro. Okay, so here we go. This is ArcGIS Pro. This is the latest version 2.7.1. So here's that ribbon interface that I was just mentioning. So you've got the tools up here, or the menus that get you the tools in the ribbon. And this is kind of a smart interface. So if I go down into, say, this map and the contents, and I select a layer here, notice that new tabs appear up here in the ribbon. So tabs to control the appearance of the layer, or tools to configure labeling associated with the layer, or dealing with the attribute data associated with the layer. So as you select different things, this ribbon is going to change to reflect that. If I go in and I say I'm going to open a layout here. Okay. So when I open the layout here, notice again, the ribbon's going to change. I get tabs associated with the layout, and even tabs that are there like the insert. So we have an insert here when looking at a map, but then we also have an insert. We go here and look at the layout. So they change based on what you're actively working in. So the need to remember to go back to this toolbar or that toolbar kind of goes away, because that ribbon is going to adjust depending on what you have active. And I think that's pretty cool, really. And it's much more intuitive, again, for those new users. So another thing I want to point out is that with Pro, we use projects. And I don't know how many of y'all go back as far is the old ArcView days, ArcView 3.x, right? We had those APR files. Okay. Pro has basically brought that concept back. They're APRX files, and pretty much anything dealing with Pro has an X at the end of the file extension now. So in a single project file, we're going to have multiple maps. So there's no need to create all these different MXDs. So in Arcmap, we have an MXD to print 8.5 by 11 maps. We have an MXD set up for 11 by 17. We have MXDs set up for the zoning map and another one set up for the land use map or whatever, right? In a single project, I can have multiple maps. So you can see right here that in this particular project, these are all the different maps I have, and the icons identify kind of what they are. So this is a 2D map. Here's a 3D scene. We can have, let's see, I think I've got a base map somewhere in here. I thought, yep, there's a base map. So you can create your own base maps in here. So you can have all of these, and they don't even have to be in the same area, right? So this is a data set I use for training a lot. It's the theoretical city of Trippville that's located here in Georgia. But then you can see I've got this layout that references a map that's up in New England. Okay, so you can mix and match and do all kinds of things in a single project. And it can point to different database connections, right? So if I click here, here's database connections. I can be file geodatabases, SDE geodatabases, and so on. So your single project can have multiple maps. It can have multiple layouts, multiple databases, multiple toolbars, you name it. You know, we can put that in a single project, which can reduce the amount of file management you have to have. And as I mentioned, we can sit here and look at 2D and 3D. So here's a 3D scene of the same city of Trippville. And this doesn't require an extension. You know, you don't have to have City Engine to do this. You don't have to have Spatial Analyst or 3D Analyst to do this. This I created in the core of the product. Okay. And you don't have to be as fancy as this. It looks cool when you do this for a presentation, right? But you can have as many 3D maps in there as you want. So it opens up a whole new way to look at your data. Now, one of the big concerns I think people have had with Pro is when Pro first came out, you were always in an edit session. There in Arcmap, we had to start and stop editing. So we kind of had that safety net when editing our data, right? In Arc Pro, when it came out, you were always in an edit session, which was a concern. Now, one of the things they've added very recently to help address that concern is the ability, if you go into options and to editing, there it is. And you kind of scroll down here under, where's that? Under session, there's a box here for enable and disable editing from the edit tab. Now, by default, this is not checked, but if you check this box, I'm gonna go back in here, go back to the edit tab. It's going to add this button right here, which is basically the same as starting and stopping editing. So right now, that's not highlighted. I can't edit this data. If I turn that on, it'll turn to blue and put a little black square up there. Now I can edit my data. Okay. So if that was one of your big concerns that you didn't want to accidentally edit data when you didn't mean to, they now have giving you a way to address that, to re-enable that safety net, if you will. Okay. So trying to keep track of time here. So I want to make sure we get everything covered. So again, if that was a concern, we've got that. We can handle shape files and geodatabases and all that in here. It's also heavily integrated with ArcGIS Online or Portal for ArcGIS. So I can quickly come in here and start accessing my data that I published to either of those and begin bringing it in, edit the data and whatnot, just like we would say collector or something like that. So with that, we'll go back to my slides. It should be here. Okay, now there are still some things Pro does not do that Arcmap does. So geometric networks. ArcPro can view data in a geometric network, query, print, all that, but it cannot edit any data in a geometric network, and it cannot create or manage geometric networks. That's largely because Esri is replacing those with either the utility network, which is a whole monstrosity in and of itself. Not necessarily a bad monstrosity, but it still is a monstrosity. And something that recently just came out, I think at 2.6, which is something called a trace network, which right now only exists in a file geodatabase, but in basic functionality, it's a geometric network. They just named it something different. Cartographic representations, those aren't supported. I don't expect them to. Coverages and personal geodatabases are not supported in Pro. So if you're still using either of those, and I probably guess nobody's really using coverages anymore, but more personal geodatabases, ArcPro will not even let you view those. It doesn't even know they exist. So if you have those, you'll need to port those to file geodatabases. And if you're using the Arcmap parcel fabric, ArcPro cannot edit that data. It can view it, query it, just like a geometric network, but can't edit it. And why is that? Well, that's because ArcPro has its own parcel fabric. It's a whole new thing. Esri does have tools to go from one to the other. Well, let me back that up. It has tools to go from the Arcmap parcel fabric to the ArcPro parcel fabric. Doesn't go the other way. But you would have to make that switch if you're going to do that. Other things that ArcPro does that Arcmap doesn't is you can edit in multiple workspaces at a time. So if you have some data that's in a shape file, some data that's in a geodatabase, and some data that's coming through ArcGIS Online, they're all editable. You don't have to keep switching back and forth between which one of those workspaces you're editing in. If it's editable and you either go with the always on editing or set turn editing on and off thing, you can do those. No going back and forth, makes it a lot more efficient. I really like that part. We can edit feature services natively. Again, Pro is heavily integrated with both Portal for ArcGIS and ArcGIS Online, so it can ingest those feature services and treats them just like a normal layer. And you can do that. Support for the new Arcade. So that's an expression language from Esri to create labeling expressions, symbology expressions, field expressions for your identify window or HTML pop-up window, and so much more. And they keep expanding the capabilities of that. We can also natively edit and display. I showed you the display of 3D data. We can also edit 3D data. So we can make that even without the extensions, you can edit it. Now, you still have to have the extensions to do 3D analysis, but we can maintain data and a whole lot of other things that we talked about, from 3D, additional 3D formats, and the new notebooks that are supported. So with that, I think we're right up on our 5-minute question and answer period, Jeff, if we want to open it up for that.
Yes, thank you, Trip. That's great. We do have 2 questions right now, and we've also had some comments and things. I'm going to copy and paste those in an email to you instead of read them off, because everybody else can see them. But I want to get them to you so you'll see what people have said. But the 2 questions are, the first one is it difficult to bring over Arcmap templates and models into Pro?
Of course, you cut for a second.
Were you able to hear me?
No, my audio cut out. I think I'm gonna have to get a new headphone thing.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll repeat so we've got 2 questions. The first one is it difficult to bring over Arcmap templates and models into Pro?
No, there are tools in ArcPro, and I'll switch over there real quick. So if we go back to the insert, we can import a map, which would be an MXD file directly in, and that would import any of the data frames and layouts from Arcmap into ArcPro. And then of course, it'll also be able to bring in any layer files you have or map files, anything like pretty much anything created in Arcmap can be brought into Pro. Things like layer files and map files and all that created in Pro cannot go back into Arcmap.
Okay.
Good question.
Yep. A couple more have come in. So the next question is about projects. The project files, do they get corrupted like the old ArcView 3 ones used to do? have you heard about that happening with Pro project files?
Not as frequently. Can it happen? Yes, I have had some projects files I've created for demos where I just kept adding more and more stuff into them. That obviously the bigger they get, the chance of corruption is higher. Also, I've tried pulling one across a VPN connection. That didn't go so well. So can it happen? Yes, I will say this. It doesn't happen nearly as frequently as I experienced in the old ArcView days.
All right. Are there major changes between Arcmap, Model Builder, and Pro?
Not major.
Builder.
Yeah, no, they're not major changes. There is some more functionality in the Pro version. They have some additional iterators and things like that that aren't in Arcmap. But yeah, pretty much the interface works very similar, how you create models. And I'll be honest, most of the models I created in Arcmap run fine in Pro, unless you get some Python coding in there and some other things like that. But if you're using straight geoprocessing tools, I haven't experienced any real big issues there.
Does Pro allow versioning?
Yes, Pro does allow versioning.
Okay.
It works pretty much just like Arcmap does.
Why does Pro have limited symbology as compared to Arcmap?
Okay, well, so there's two things here. First off, it doesn't really have limited symbology. It just doesn't load as much initial symbology. There's additional styles that aren't automatically loaded. The other part to that is it loads a limited set of those that are optimized for web publishing because of the integration between Portal and ArcGIS Online. Esri is really pushing that web publishing idea. So it wants to push you to try to use optimized web type symbology. So you can add additional symbol sets, styles, both come with Pro, as well as you can load in all your styles from Arcmap as well.
All right. Someone's asking if any county in North Carolina is completely gone to Arc Pro. I don't know the answer to that, but I guess if someone wants to tell us their story, that would be welcome to that. Is the functionality similar to data-driven pages?
So yeah, they call it map series in Arc Pro.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the basic functionality is definitely in there. And it works pretty much the same way. They just changed the name of it. So, well, let me back that up. Originally, before they added data-driven pages, we had that extension that I suddenly can't think of the name of, but it created map series in that Esri extension. And then
map book or something like that.
Yeah, it was the map book. Anyway, it was a developer extension, but so they've gone back to what they used to call it because that's Esri, right?
Okay, one more here. Are there rules for projects? Should I create one project with all the necessary data and all the layout templates that are necessary?
It's going to really depend on your organization and users on
Mm-hmm.
how the best way to set that up. Having a template, which you can do, you can create a project template that has those things in it that you can then use to generate, which I would encourage. There are some gotchas on that with dealing with map drives and some other things. Again, if you go back to my YouTube channel, I talk about that on a couple of different videos there if anybody's interested, or if you want to talk more offline, we're kind of up against the wall, but yeah, I can't give you direct because it depends.
Okay. Okay. One more. We'll go ahead and squeeze in. Have you experienced any issues with Pro failing to save edits without warning you? They say I asked Esri and got told to copy it to my machine locally to mitigate this issue.
I haven't experienced anything. Of course, I don't, there is an autosave option in Arc Pro. I don't enable it. I'm still a manual saver. But I haven't had any problems. Now, admittedly, I'm pushing things across a smaller network. It's in my house. So, but even at our Davie office before all the COVID stuff, we were pushing stuff into SDE, and I did not have any problems personally.
Okay, well, I want to thank you there, and we want to move over to the next session, but thank you very much, Trip. I'm sure you'll be willing to take any questions if people want to email you, and you're always very gracious with your time and expertise. So thanks again for everyone joining us, and I'll mention this is going to be recorded and put on YouTube in a few weeks for people to watch later if you want to show it to people.